All right, welcome and good morning. My name is Genevieve Croft, and I'm a program scientist at Schmidt Sciences, which is a US-based philanthropy focused on fostering advancements in science and technology. At Schmidt Sciences, I lead a research funding effort that's designed to increase the science, technology, and engineering available to help us to use waste biomass in bioproduction. Scientific research such as this is one element of a successful bioeconomy, which is the topic of our panel today. Globally speaking, there's no generalizable accepted definition of the bioeconomy, but just to set the tone for what we'll be talking about, in the United States, we generally agree that it is economic activity driven by advances in the life sciences and biotechnology, and aided by advances in engineering and computing sciences. So to put it really simply, it's economic activity driven and supported by biology, which includes agriculture and the development of new products from cultivated plants and animals. In the bioeconomy, we think about a lot of potential benefits that are very exciting, including increases in sustainability, our reduced dependence on fossil fuels, improvements in food security and nutrition, and contributions to a growing economy. Today, we're going to explore the benefits of the bioeconomy and also think about what are the policies and practices we need in place to achieve all of these ambitions. I'm very excited to be here with an esteemed panel of experts who are all leaders in the bioeconomy and in agriculture. They're representing voices from the United States as well as the international community. They're coming from organizations including the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation on Agriculture, the United Soybean Board, and the US Department of Agriculture. We have quite a short time for us today, so in just a moment, I'll invite each of our panelists to introduce themselves and to share some opening thoughts about the bioeconomy. We'll then move into our discussion, and before the end, we'd like to take questions from the audience. So I hope you're thinking about how you might like to engage with our panelists before we all wrap up. So without further ado, I'd like to turn over to Mr. Kaveh Zaidi, the Director of the Office of Climate Change, Biodiversity, and the Environment at the UNFAO.
Good morning, and thank you so much. So as you can imagine, as Director of the Office of Climate Change, Biodiversity, and Environment, I'm looking at the bioeconomy and seeing how the bioeconomy fits into that conversation that we have at FAO. We see across the world a lot of discussions on biodiversity and agriculture, on climate change and agriculture, on land degradation and agriculture. Many of those happening this year in what are called the conferences of the parties that some of us have attended and will attend. And traditionally that conversation, when it came to agriculture, was a fairly negative conversation. How agriculture impacts on biodiversity, how agriculture impacts on and causes climate change, land degradation, and so on. And we've been working very hard with many of you, with many of those who are sitting up here, to change that narrative around agriculture and food systems as a solution provider, also in the domains of biodiversity and climate change and land degradation, as well as food security. And that's in a way where bioeconomy comes in, because this agri-food system transformation that is spoken about does depend on new kinds of thinking, new ways of doing things, new approaches, including in agriculture. Now, of course, bioeconomy is not new, right? It's something that certainly at FAO we've been working on for the best part of a decade. It's embedded in our program. Our countries, our members, have made it one of the priority areas of FAO's work, which is probably the only UN organization that has this embedded. But it is gaining political attention at the global level, and this is a big opportunity, I think, to progress this agenda of agri-food system transformation that brings with it food security along with the sustainability needs. One of the challenges is that there is no consensus on what is a bioeconomy. There is no one bioeconomy. If you listen to Brazil, who had this very central in the G20 conversation, it's the socio-bioeconomy, very much about forest and non-forest timber products that come out of the Amazon, for example. You listen to others, it's very much about the circular bioeconomy, the tech-driven bioeconomy, the bioenergy-driven bioeconomy. So there are many different bioeconomies at the moment. And the interesting thing is that when we look across the world at over 40 countries that actually have their own bioeconomy strategies, yes, they're different, but they have commonalities. And I think that's what makes it quite exciting to discuss. The commonalities of meeting the need, of course, for the increased demand for food, feed, fiber, and so on, while also tackling environmental degradation, climate change, and at the same time bringing innovation, right, and opportunities to rural people. So it's a really big ask of the bioeconomy, and that's why we're trying to build around these commonalities, develop and build on principles that are common across countries of what bioeconomies look like, metrics of how you measure that, because ultimately bioeconomy goes out of the national context. It is to some degree about international approaches to our agri-food system transformation that brings those climate, biodiversity, and broader benefits.
Thank you, Kaveh. You've seeded some interesting thoughts here. Let's go ahead and turn to Mr. Lloyd Day, who's the Deputy Director General at IICA, and hear your thoughts.
Well, thank you very much, Genevieve, and good morning, everyone. It's nice to be back in Iowa. It's nice to see old friends like Kaveh. The last time I saw him, I was in a very hot Rome trying to get a taxi, and I ended up walking, and that was it. I was done for the day. IICA represents the ministers of agriculture of the Americas, 34 countries from Canada in the north to Argentina and Chile in the south, and 14 member states in the Caribbean. And we're honored to have with us today the Secretary of Agriculture of Honduras, Laura Suazo, who's here in the front. Thank you for being here, Secretary Suazo. She's a good friend of ours, and she's an important leader in the Americas. The bioeconomy is a program at IICA, and it started in this administration, so it has about 7 years of life with the term bioeconomy. Before it was really, we had a biotech program, and the biotech program is very active in promoting biotechnology and good regulatory policies, but we're now talking about really the transition from a fossil fuel-based economy into a bioeconomy. And here in Iowa, there's a great example of that, and that all happened here, just in this part of the century, mostly, where we converted corn into ethanol, and it's been a huge source of economic development in this area, and it's really part of what we all call the circular economy. So you have a farm that grows its corn, that corn goes to an ethanol plant, we get DDGs as residue of that, that's fed to cattle, the cattle's milked, the residue of the cattle is then turned into methane and to run the farm as well as a whole grid, and so we have a great example of a bioeconomy right here in Iowa, and it's been hugely successful. And as Genevieve said, biology is the basis for all of this. And so there's a lot of research that's going on here in Iowa and around the world about how we can use technology in order to convert biomass and residue from crops into a whole bunch of different things. And that could be everything from bioplastics to different types of container. I was at the University of Tennessee earlier this year, and we did a field trip where we went out to a switchgrass facility. That was massive. It was almost the size of this convention center, in which they were converting switchgrass into packaging. And so the whole world that was previously a fossil fuel-based economy is now becoming a bioeconomy that's cleaner, that's greener. And our job at IICA, working with the FAO and others, is to work on the policies so that governments can give their farmers and their entrepreneurs the tools to enable this transition. And so I'll stop there.
All right, thank you so much, Lloyd. Let's next turn to Greg Jaff, the Senior Advisor to the Secretary at the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Greg Jaffe, and I work in the Department of Agriculture in the Secretary's office. I work on a number of issues. I am the Chief Regulatory Officer, so I get all of our regulations out, but I also cover our food safety mission area, our research and development mission areas, and I do work on PFAS, pesticides, food loss and waste, biotechnology, biofuels, and bioeconomy. But I have to say, the topic I like the best is bioeconomy, because I think there's so much opportunity out there. The bioeconomy is very important to the United States. The Biden-Harris administration 2 years ago, in September of 2022, issued an executive order on biotechnology and biomanufacturing to set up a domestic bioeconomy, and it included in that agriculture as a major part of that bioeconomy. And so one of my jobs is sort of to implement that executive order at the departmental level and ensure that we do that. In some ways, that's easy. I think one can argue that USDA has been involved in bioeconomy since its establishment back in 1862. I mean, we've been producing biomass for a long time. And we do so much. Bioeconomy touches all of our areas. We conduct research and development with our intramural and extramural partners. We invest in the infrastructure of the bioeconomy through our rural development and our Forest Service mission areas. I mean, we promote and build markets for bio-based products through our BioPreferred program. But before I go into any of those different investments, I sort of wanted to explain why the bioeconomy is so important to U.S. agriculture and forestry. And I think I can do it. USDA has a number of strategic goals, and the bioeconomy really helps support a couple of those strategic goals. So the first goal I will mention is expanding economic opportunities and improving the quality of life in rural and tribal communities. If we want farmers to continue producing food and meet our food and nutrition security goals, we also need those farmers to have additional income streams so they can support their families. The bioeconomy and the bio-based products helps with all of that. Similarly, if bio-based products are manufactured in those same rural communities where that biomass is located, that creates good paying jobs and economic opportunities for those communities. So we think that if we want to help our small and mid-sized farmers in the United States, and I'm sure in lots of other parts of the world, that are struggling, that have struggled to make a living from on-farm activities, from just producing the food that we all need, and that's a very important thing. So when I say just, I don't mean it that in any way lessens it, but they need to do off-farm income. Instead of that, why can't we build bioeconomy streams and better utilize the crops that they're producing, the biomass that they're producing for additional income streams, and build out those rural economies? So I think that's one of the goals that we have at USDA that the bioeconomy really supports. The second one is to make agriculture more sustainable and to combat climate change. And this involves reducing agriculture's greenhouse gas emissions and helping agriculture adapt to climate change while still producing the food, fiber, fuel, and everything we need. And the bioeconomy helps us achieve these goals because we can produce products from portions of our crops that are not used for traditional food production, as well as food and agricultural waste. The same can be said for woody biomass that would otherwise not be used for products. That woody biomass might just go up in a forest fire. Instead, if we can capture that carbon, we can turn that into fuel. We can turn that into wood-based products. We, make that much more sustainable. So, I can go into lots of things we do there. I wanted to mention two things quickly. We did a report on economic analysis of the bio-based products industry, and we found that sector contributed $489 billion to the U.S. economy. It supported 4 million jobs in every state, and it displaced 10.7 billion barrels of oil equivalents. And that's just a start now. That didn't include bioenergy in it. And so I think we really have an opportunity here to really build out that bioeconomy. And I'll just end by sort of saying two things. My hope would be that we could come back to the World Food Prize in a few years and we wouldn't be talking about the bioeconomy. We would just be talking about the economy, because there would be so many bio-based products in it, the majority of it, that would be the economy. And the second one is that we would replace all the below-ground carbon that we're using with above-ground carbon. That's the goal here, to use above-ground carbon that we're producing in farms like Megan's farm and eliminate using that below-ground carbon, the petroleum and coal and other things that are causing problems to our environment.
Yeah, thank you so much. Now we'll turn to Megan Kaiser, the past chair of the United Soybean Board. She's also a soil scientist and a farmer.
Yeah, well, geez, coming after, this might be a boring panel because I agree with everything that I've heard so far. But yes, I'm Megan Kaiser. I am the past chair of the United Soybean Board, and we farm in Missouri, near the Missouri River, about an hour east of Kansas City. I'm also a soil scientist and run Perry Agricultural Laboratory, where we actually receive soil samples from 78 different countries here in the United States, and we help farmers decipher the nutrient needs that the land needs But often people hear that and they think, oh, this is just straight in chemistry, straight out. I think of it as nutritional trade. And so we think about nutrition into the soil, which is then into the plant, which is then into the product that we produce. And we also think about how that nutrition impacts the physical structure of the soil to eliminate or at least diminish degradation issues. But then also how that stimulates the biological activity in the soil. So we think about this in a very holistic way from the soil all the way up to the plant, and then that beautiful miracle soybean that we produce on our farm, how great it is now that we can think about the use beyond the nutrition for the plant or animal that eats that soybean, but holistically thinking about how can we then use the byproducts of that crush to then improve the environment beyond just the soil on the farm, but on a global basis. How can we improve air quality? How can we really meet the demands of everyday life? The mission of the United Soybean Board is delivering soy solutions for every life, every day. And we did that very intentionally. That was our new strategic plan 3 years ago, because it's not just the direct in and out of the farm, but creating this economy that helps stimulate rural economies by having a stronger demand for farm products, builds a stronger rural economy, and that helps everything from our local hospitals. I mean, think about that. Our local hospitals, our local schools, our local businesses. And so we're able, as we sit around the table at the United Soybean Board and we were talking about what are some things that we could help solve. One of the things in the news was plastics in the ocean. Well, how can we use our soybean oil to create biodegradable plastic products, diminishing need for fossil fuel-based plastics, and at the same time removing toxins from our environment by using above-ground carbon. I love that, in a renewable, sustainable fashion. And so this is what U.S. soybean farmers are thinking about, and I'm excited that it sounds like other people are thinking about it too. So glad to be here.
Thanks so much, Megan. As a scientist, it's so exciting to hear about all the possibilities that new discoveries can play in a growing bioeconomy. And it's really exciting that U.S. soy farmers are thinking about those sorts of things. I think we've all heard about a lot of our hopes for the bioeconomy. There's a lot of potential benefits, and I think if we can dig into that first, that'll be a really interesting starting point for our discussion. And considering that the bioeconomy begins with that primary production, with the production of biomass, maybe we'll turn to Megan first and just ask you your perspective on how U.S. soy farmers benefit from a growing bioeconomy, and maybe you can provide us with a couple more examples of potential products that are bio-based derived from soy.
So one of the ways is just building demand. You know, last year we were talking about what an interesting moment we are in the U.S. soy story, in that we're crushing soybeans for the oil, which 30 years ago was a byproduct waste almost, that we started with biodiesel. And found some wonderful environmental impacts of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, reducing particulate emissions from biodiesel. But then now we said, well, what else can we do? So soy tires, soy asphalt. One of the ones that I'm most excited about is soy firefighting foam. And what an amazing story this is. We every year, U.S. soybean farmers, we meet with a local fire department and serve the first responders a meal. And we talk to them about this soy foam and how excited they were about the idea that they could fight fires as effectively without the concern of PFAS or fluorine in their foam, and that they would breathe that in and have that on their clothes that they take home to their families. They were relieved. And then not only that, when they're spraying this foam, it's not going to introduce PFAS into the water supply. At the same time, I get to feel good about that, because the soybeans that were being crushed for the protein and the nutrition for animals and for human food, at the same time, we can also help preserve the environment by using a soy bio-based product. We have that commercially available now, all because of this forward thought about what else could we solve. And so one of the ones that's not commercially available yet, but it's still one of my favorite ones to talk about, is soy straws. again, this was a bunch of farmers sitting around a table and saying, hey, there's a lot of sea turtles that are, dying from plastics in the ocean. What could we do about that? And straws was one of those stories. And we do have a product now. But I think it's interesting that farmers are thinking about how could we solve this? And then we find partners that help us figure out the chemistry. And then we have a product that really can be a deliverable soy solution for an environmental issue.
Wow, so from Missouri farmland to the Atlantic Ocean, amazing. It really gives you a sense of the diversity of opportunity out there. Mm-hmm. Stepping back a little bit, I wanted to turn to Greg and just ask from your perspective, not just the grower's perspective, but the U.S. domestic perspective, what are the benefits of a domestic bioeconomy, and how are various people in that supply chain going to benefit from this growth?
So I love Megan's view of the PFAS-free firefighting foam. I went to watch it demonstrated in Georgia and watched firefighters try the PFAS foam and the soy foam. Almost no difference in fighting fires, and the farmers just loved it because, many of them have risks of cancer from having used firefighting foam that had PFAS for much of their lives. And they looked at the next generation, their kids who would go into being firefighters, and said, we have to get this. So there are some really interesting things, and that, to me, that's a twofer. Happens to be two of my topics, PFAS and bioeconomy. But I think we can find lots of those twofers, and that's what I think there are just so many benefits out there. So, some of the things we've been investing in, I mentioned that USDA invests in biomanufacturing infrastructure. So I can just name a few of the projects we've invested in. We're investing in a first-of-its-kind biorefinery facility, which is an anaerobic digester that's taking manure and food waste and turning it into renewable natural gas. We have another facility that will use methane-arrested anaerobic digestion to convert food waste into fertilizer. So, so we have a bio-based fertilizer. We have a facility, a precision fermentation facility that will allow the production of bio-based proteins and ingredients for consumers. Our wood products division has invested in a facility in Oregon that is going to take low-value hazardous fuel waste and turn that into torrid fuel and biochar. And so, we have all these examples at USDA of innovative companies that are coming to us. We're helping them. We're giving them loans. We're giving them grants to build out these markets. And I think, each of these is an opportunity to take, in most cases, is an existing biomass that otherwise would just either go up in flames or decompose in a landfill, letting off methane, into a productive product instead. And so, to me, that's a win-win for all of us. And I don't know how we can do it otherwise. But I've gone to a number of roundtables, and one of the roundtables I went to in Oregon, there's a company up there that's importing banana leaves from Guatemala, and it's taking those banana leaves from Guatemala and turning them into a fiber that can be used in clothing, can be used in sneakers, in shoes. And so, here's an example also. We don't grow a lot of banana leaves in the United States, but there's an income stream, therefore, for those farmers in Guatemala from this, a portion of biomass that they might not otherwise be using. And so, what I love about my job each day is the number of people that come across, both researchers in USDA and others who have these great ideas and have more than that, they have proof of concept. And to me, the challenge is how do we get that from that proof of concept to the commercial stage and onto the consumer, being used by consumers.
All right. So I think that we've really heard a great number of opportunities there economically and in terms of sustainability. Kaveh, I'm curious about the contributions to environmental sustainability or food security, more specifically, rural development. Can you provide us with some information there?
Well, I think the beauty of the bioeconomy is that it has to do exactly what Greg said. I mean, it's more than a twofer, right? It's an approach that, of course, deals with broadening the income streams and dealing with the livelihoods of farmers, but it also addresses our very urgent and real biodiversity challenges, and environmental challenges, the climate challenges. So in a way, we have to have like a filter of looking at the bioeconomy that makes sure that it is ticking all of these boxes. That's the vital part. We have solutions that bring multiple benefits, and I think that is the beauty of what the bioeconomy should be promoting. Now, there is, of course, as with anything that is beginning to get the kind of traction that we see with bioeconomy, we have to be careful that we maintain the integrity. The examples we heard are really perfect examples of things that work. But we have seen the backlash you get when you push this too far and you get like the green economy and everything is suddenly green and it's not really. And I think with the bioeconomy we have to be very careful and have, although we don't have a singular definition, at least have enough of a structure and understanding that these are the kind of products, these are the kind of activities that bring multiple benefits across these urgent agendas that we have. And we're seeing it all over the place. We have some beautiful examples here. I think yesterday we saw one of the conversations around the low-cost tech for recycling organic waste into nutrient-rich organic fertilizers, etc. We've also got projects in countries like Pakistan turning banana waste into fiber. These are magical because they're bringing new income streams to the work of farmers, to the work of agricultural communities, many of whom are really beginning to get seriously impacted by climate change, and therefore, their livelihoods are endangered. The bioenergy from agricultural waste. I mean, it's almost a no-brainer, but it's not yet scaled up at the level that it needs to be to really begin to turn the needle on the urgent climate challenges that we face, the biodiversity challenges that we face. So the bottom line is that we need bio-based interventions that bring multiple benefits, and as we move away from the fossil fuel-based economy, and we're beginning to see pieces of that in markets all over the world, but we don't yet have the structure to sort of almost compare and bring those experiences together and scale them up and to sell them in a way, as really investable opportunities at the farm level.
Wow. All right. Well, I wanted to dig in one more time into the why, and then we'll turn to the how. So, Lloyd, if I could ask you about a bold statement that I have been informed of, that IICA considers the bioeconomy to be a strategic commitment for the Americas. Could you tell us why that is?
Well, I'm going to answer your question like a politician. I hear your question, I understand it, but I'm going to say whatever I want. And the thing is I've been triggered by all the different comments by all my colleagues, so I'll get to why it's important. But I mean, in a nutshell, the bioeconomy is important because the Americas, from north to south, is just a huge biodiverse region with enormous potential. Enormous potential to both feed the world, fuel the world, and also create new and different products that we've all been talking about right here. Listening to Megan, who I met a long time ago. She looks so young, I can't believe I met her all those years ago. But before even meeting her in another life, I was the administrator of the Agricultural Marketing Service, and under that was the United States Soybean Board, and I went to a USB meeting. And the USB is funded by something called a checkoff program. Now, a lot of people complain about checkoff programs, but they're fantastic because they not only help promote a product and help drive consumer demand for a product, but they also funnel research and investment from farmers into new uses, as she just described. And my favorite example of a bio-based product, because it's a story that I can remember now, almost 20 years later, is that the foam in a Ford Mustang comes from soy. That's really cool. And that's just one example of many areas of the bioeconomy. I was talking about the integrated farm. The work that's being done in dairy across the world, and dairy's everywhere. There's 1 billion people that are involved in the dairy sector, and so there's lots of cows, there's lots of waste, and there's lots of ways to harness that waste into energy and other types of activities, fertilizer, et cetera. And so it's the circular economy. And recently, as I was preparing for this, Greg wanted stories and he wanted examples. And my favorite example is in a town called General Cabrera in the Cordoba region of Argentina. Argentina had huge blackouts in 2019. But in this town, they grow peanuts. and they have a lot of peanut residue, peanut shells. Now, when I think of peanut shells, I think of going to the Dutch Goose in Menlo Park, having a beer and throwing peanut shells on the ground. Well, there they take their peanut shells and they convert it and they burn it and they convert it into steam, they convert it into electricity. And so when Argentina had a blackout through the entire country, General Cabrera had electricity. And that's a cool story. We're seeing this with tons of different products. Coffee in Central America. We have the secretary from Honduras. We also have the honor of just recently being joined by the former Secretary of Agriculture and Minister of Agriculture of Chile, Carlos Furcha. Thank you for joining us. Coffee has a lot of residue, and a lot of that residue can be used for a lot of different products, from cosmetics to energy to bioinputs to fertilizer. All these kind of things are helping create a greener economy, lessening the need for fertilizers and different types of biofertilizers, and some of that will be synthetic, let's be honest. The combination of the bioeconomy with synthetics, they call it synthetic biology, has a real potential to be a game changer in terms of scaling up the bioeconomy. So things like that are why we think, first, research and investment is important, and second, in the Americas, there's huge opportunity given the diversity of resources, the diversity of plants. And I might just a plug for folks here in the north and from around the world that we need more investment in the tropics. The tropics does not, it gets pennies to the dollar of what investment in temperate zones get. So we need to focus development aid, Greg, toward research in the and Cov. We need to focus on the tropics where we can convert these, everything from bananas to pineapples to coffee to pinon to lots of different elements in the bioeconomy into different resources that can help create this transition from a fossil fuel economy to a bioeconomy.
Thank you, Lloyd. I'm totally bought in, you may not know this, into the bioeconomy and the promise that all of these bio-based products have to offer us. But how are we going to get there? We think about the Ford Mustang, we think about our bio-based foam for firefighting, but what if they're not cost competitive? So I wanted to ask you, Lloyd, what is IICA doing to promote the bioeconomy? And I'm going to mention we're running short on time, so I'd like to get a few viewpoints.
So I'll be as quick as possible. So what we're trying to do is first is to build awareness through panels, through conferences like this, through documents, through articles, through advocacy. The second is capacity building. We need to work with folks around the world in all different levels of capacity training for the policymakers, but as well as for entrepreneurs, for those that are trying to do something in the bioeconomy sphere, bio-businesses. And then, of course, as governments, we need to work on regulations. And so one of the things we've recently been doing through the networks that we've established based on the bioeconomy, liquid biofuels, is we're working with member governments like Honduras and other members of Central America. They all came to Costa Rica a few weeks ago. And all the energy ministers discussed how they move to a blend policy for ethanol, bioethanol, and biofuels with gasoline in order to reduce their dependence on gasoline, in order to also promote the ethanol industry in those countries. So we had 8 countries that were training on policy development in that particular area right now, and that's going to have a very important impact. And then finally, it's positioning in global spaces like the World Food Program. And so with that, I see you're giving me this.
That's great.
Stop.
I see actually your colleague to your left ready to jump in there with what the USDA is doing.
I just wanted to give 2 examples. Obviously, we've got to jumpstart an industry that's competing against petroleum industry that has already a lot of infrastructure and has a lot of assets already in the ground, and that is difficult. So. And they're fighting this. So one of the things we just announced 2 days ago, a $200 million grant program called the Bio-Based Product Market Access Grant Program. And that is going to help a number of companies who have bio-based products, have shown proof of concept, but haven't been able to do what we call their demonstration unit, show that they can do it feasibility, economic and technical feasibility at scale. And so that's been sort of that valley of death we've heard about in some other sessions. This is the valley of death here in terms of trying to get to the stage where then you can get venture capital and loan guarantees and things like that to actually build that plant that you need, that several $100 million. And so we've just announced this grant program to be able to help companies get through that and do that. The government has limited resources. A lot of people think it's unlimited, but it isn't. And that's just one way we can do that. The other thing I wanted to mention is we have our Bio Preferred program. So we have a mandatory and voluntary labeling program that it allows two things. One, it's a voluntary labeling program for companies that have bio-based products. It's an easy program. They get certified with the amount of bio-based content. I think the firefighting foam that Megan talked about is 84% bio-based content. They get the label on it, and then consumers and others can purchase those products based on that label. So consumers, you're building a market for consumers. But more importantly, we have a mandatory federal procurement program. So companies that come in and their products meet the bio-based, bio-preferred specs are then put in a catalog, and the federal government gives them preference for purchasing of those. That might be cleaning supplies, it might be flooring made out of hemp, it could be a host of different things, and we have about 9,000 products there. And so one of the things we're trying to do is build the demand, build that pull. If you have a market already established that the federal government is willing to spend millions of dollars on these products, hopefully that will help get the investment and move companies from the lab and get what they need to start producing it at scale in production.
Thank you, Greg. And I see Kaveh is also ready to tell us a little bit. You're wrangling a lot of different perspectives, globally speaking. How is FAO approaching this opportunity?
Maybe three ways. Number one is we're making sure that this is a central part of the conversation between governments, right? These experiences are emerging all over the world, the Americas and the US and elsewhere, and we're making sure that there is a space for that conversation, for the sharing of the experiences that are happening across the world. And we had the bioeconomy as part of our committee on agriculture recently, as a part of our committee on forestry. So this is an important conversation to have for the sharing across the world, because the interest is there. The second piece beyond the sharing is we hope that those conversations also help to set the framework. You know, to some degree, it's okay to let 1,000 flowers bloom and what have you, but at some stage you have to have some sort of framing of this conversation of what is or isn't part of the bioeconomy, because otherwise it's sort of is everything, and it becomes confusing. It becomes confusing for the consumers. It becomes confusing for the investors, and of course for those who are trying to generate a bioeconomy, which brings me to the third thing that we're doing. Now that we understand what the bioeconomy could look like, we're beginning to establish the aspirational principles and some of the metrics around it. We're also helping countries, developing countries in particular, then access finance for bringing to life the bioeconomy, and access finance especially through climate, biodiversity, and other funds, right? So that haven't traditionally been investing in agri-food system solutions. And the bioeconomy is now giving us an avenue to generate some of that investment through the Global Environment Facility and other, what they're called vertical funds, other global funds that can help to promote the environmental, the sustainability agenda, but through agri-food systems and the bioeconomy.
Can I just add on that? One of the things the United Soybean Board is doing is bringing awareness to, when we set up these metrics and these measurements, making sure that bias is as removed as possible, because that can be an issue. And we have to remember one of the oldest laws of science: matter is neither created nor destroyed, it simply changes form. So we have to think holistically about compared to what. When we're moving forward with a bioeconomy, sometimes soy is, folks will say, oh, well, soy is causing other issues in the environment. Well, compared to what? One of the ways that we mitigate our environmental impact is we have biodiesel in every tractor, truck, and combine on our farm. Are we paid for that? No. Do we know it's the right thing to do? Absolutely. So as we look at holistic systems, I know I'm reducing my greenhouse gas impact on our farm, so every soybean that leaves our farm is a little bit better for the environment. We have to consider that when we make these improvements on the farm from the ground up, when we take care of our soil, that it's treated differently in that measurement process, that we acknowledge the efforts made in different parts of the world and in different farming systems, and how that actually improves the entire life cycle all the way to that product that is eventually produced. And we have to be careful, and we can do that. Farmers are taking wonderful care of their land. Precision soil sampling, precision fertilizer application, and we know exactly the quality of our grain that we produce. We can use that data as a proof of concept and as part of those metrics. So we have to be careful that when we set those measurements that we're being genuine of removing bias and really calculating the impact that we're having.
Thank you, Megan. Seeing that we're just about wrapping up here, I do want to make sure that we get some questions from out there in the audience. We have a microphone that is available. If you would like to ask a question, if you can please introduce yourself with your name, your institution, and a very brief question for our panelists. We'll see what they have to say. Are there any questions out there?
Hi, my name is Joachim von Braun, Bonn University, Germany. I'm a member of the International Advisory Council on Bioeconomy. My question relates to the definitional issues. Those of us who relate to food and agriculture know that it is difficult to define agriculture. We now have about 60 bioeconomy strategies around the world in the countries which have committed themselves to bioeconomy as they define it. In the summit which we had last week in Nairobi on bioeconomy, it, I think, was general consensus that bioeconomy is not a sector, but more like digitization pervasive and cutting across many sectors. My question relates to the non-agricultural parts of the bioeconomy, the construction sector, the biopharmaceutical sector, and the new materials sector. I think we underemphasize that, and maybe the committee can, or the panel can comment a bit on that. The big bioeconomy strategies of China, the US, and Europe have that increasingly in their focus, but we need to get it also in the developing country bioeconomy strategies.
Thank you. And let us take one more question, and then we'll let our panelists reflect. And we'll try and keep it very brief. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Dr. Shadrach from Nigeria. I'm a veterinary doctor and founder of Vet Connect. My work revolves around enabling access to animal care for livestock farmers across rural and underserved communities. One thing I find very consistent across everything I've been hearing for the last 3 days is every conversation still narrows back to see how it falls back to the reality of agriculture for especially developing nations like, say, Nigeria, which is heavy on smallholder farmers. So my thinking in terms of the conversation around the bioeconomy is how can we make it more integrated? So you find a situation whereby smallholder crop farmers, for instance, understand that production maybe stops at the point where they harvest, and for everything that once they've taken their seeds, the rest has no use to them, and maybe they set them off. But there's also another value there for the smallholder livestock farmer, which they can be able to translate to. So perhaps how can we now start intentionally infusing these conversations to say, it doesn't end with you harvesting and then setting it off because it now affects the environment. How can we connect that to the smallholder farmer? Then in terms of backward integration, which is the last point I want to raise, I see a lot of pressure coming in terms of industrialization. In my country, for instance, a lot of companies are setting up that require heavy use of cassava, and cassava is a staple in my country. So I'm saying, how can we also infuse a message that lets those who are coming in to say, let's industrialize, which is good, creates more jobs, but can we also have a strategy that captures backward integration so that there's no pressure on food in terms of ensuring that the man at the bottom still has something to be able to afford?
Thank you, and we'll stop there to make sure we have a little moment to speak. So we have questions about integration, about non-agricultural bioeconomy, and I would ask if you jump in with your thoughts that also include your wrapping up comments.
Thanks, Kaveh. It's really simple, and for the bioeconomy, it's really no different than agriculture. There's 4 elements that I think are critical to everything we do. First is we need investment. And that investment needs to go to research. That research needs to be shepherded and framed by policy. And all that will create innovation. We're living in an exciting time where we're transitioning, whether some people like it or not, from a fossil fuel-based economy that's ending to a bio-based economy, which is renewable. It's going to take investment. It's going to take energy. It's going to take government policy that doesn't say you can't do that because we think your land use change or your type of agriculture is not as green as another. Some things work, some things don't. Let's work with what works and then improve on everything else and improve on what works as too, because those two can become greener. I'll end with that.
You're looking at me. So, okay, so I'll continue. So
You look ready.
No, look, I think it's, we're at the stage, a very exciting stage with the bioeconomy. At times it does feel a little bit like the sort of Wild West, though, because we see, I was at the G20 Global Initiative on Bioeconomy, and Lloyd, you're familiar with that. So the G20 countries have this on their agenda. They're speaking about the bioeconomy, but it's clear that they're not speaking the same language, right? You have some who are coming there and just speaking essentially about biodiversity conservation as bioeconomy, and others, exactly as Joachim said, are looking way ahead at a very, it's on the pharmaceutical side, etc. And there isn't a commonality, and I think it's really important to get closer to that commonality. It's not a definitional thing, but we have to have a better understanding of that commonality, because without it, it's very hard to trigger that investment. It's very hard to trigger the research. It's very hard to do the labeling, etc., etc. And I think that's where we are right now, in trying to frame this conversation so that we can raise it and the economy that it brings with it to the potential that it can for delivering on agriculture, for delivering on biodiversity, for delivering on climate, and across these multiple agendas that are so urgent today.
Thank you. And Megan, did you want to jump in? And then
I just
Greg?
want to add on, on construction side, the first thing that comes to my mind is we've also worked on wood adhesives with soy, replacing formaldehyde, again, replacing a toxin. So one of the things that I love about this is that we're developing something the world wants. And so that's the beautiful part about this. When we think about smallholder farmers in Nigeria, I remember being at a meeting, it was a FAO adjacent meeting, and somebody said, you use so many plastics, you use so much bags and such on your farm, what do you do with all that? And I was like, well, first of all, we actually don't. We use recyclable bulk containers in the United States. But for smallholder farmers, this is a much more complex issue, and you have a lot more waste. What if we could make that biodegradable plastic? What if we could actually make it so biodegradable and actually nutrient intense that it could be used as a fertilizer? The point is, what if? And we have to make sure that we allow for that question to be asked without batting it down first because of bias, or like, nope, we don't want it from that source because that might hurt somebody else. First, we have to think, what if? And then think, okay, it's going to cause a chain reaction, but we continue to improve. We continue to mitigate the bad parts. And we can become more holistic in our thinking. And this is just the beginning of the economy, not just the bioeconomy.
Thank you. And Greg?
I'll say, Joachim, I think the U.S. strategy does include pharmaceuticals and energy and a whole host of different parts of the bioeconomy. My only thought on that is, the pharmaceutical bioeconomy is pretty well developed already, and we're talking about high-value molecules, and so to some extent, there's more investment in that. Whereas when we're talking some of these biofermentation that we're doing in the ag space for some of these molecules for food or ingredients or other things, there isn't as much. These are more high volume molecules at lower costs, and so we do need some sorts of incentives or things to do that. I think there's a little less of that in like the pharmaceutical space, where you have where there's a long use of these technologies and also better infrastructure already existing and things like that. So that may be some of the reasons why people focus more on the ag side, in addition to the fact that this is an ag conference and everything. And just to the gentleman in Nigeria, I think we want a world where, as I said before about the use of above ground carbon, where we think about every bit of above ground carbon and how it can be used and reused and reused and reused, whether that's giving, crop materials to livestock farmers to feed their farms, whether we're using it as fertilizer, whether we're using it for a whole host of things. That, I think, is the goal, and I think it's achievable because all of that has value. It's a matter of educating people. It's a matter of building the markets for that. It's about creative ingenuity to find ways to utilize that. But I think all of that above ground carbon can be utilized many more times than once.
All right, thank you so much. And I wish that we had more time to continue digging in. I think we've got a real great introduction to the bioeconomy, and there's a lot more we could have discussed. Thank you to all of you for joining us today. Really appreciate it. And if you can please join me in thanking our panelists for their contributions.